Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our program, Fake News, How to Consume the News and Still Be a Good Citizen. My name is Terja Becker, and I'm a reference and collection development librarian here at Boulder Public Library's main library. Before I introduce our two panelists today, I just want to go over some housekeeping items. First, this event is being recorded and will be available here on YouTube after today, as will our chat questions. And all of our online events are an extension of library services, and so that means all library conduct policies, which you can read more about on our website, apply in this online space as well. Next, if you enjoy this presentation, we've got a lot more good stuff coming. Please visit our website at boulderlibrary.org for our full virtual events calendar, including Summer of Discovery, our annual celebration of reading and more for kids, teens, and adults. It launches next Monday, and we're really excited about it. Finally, I'd like to thank the Boulder Library Foundation for its generous sponsorship of this and so many of our other events. So thank you guys very much. Even more than usual, 2020 has been a year of overwhelming news between COVID-19, racial tension, and the upcoming presidential election. It's more important than ever, with emotions high, that we educate ourselves on how the news works, how social media plays a role for all of us, who is trying to manipulate us, and how they are doing it, and how amid all of this, we can just get the news that we need to make informed, moral decisions and choices in our daily lives. At any time during this event, you can ask questions of our panelists by posting them to the chat in your YouTube feed. Please log into your Google or YouTube accounts to do this. These questions will be addressed later in the program during the audience Q&A portion of our event. My colleague, Catherine Bertone, will be moderating the chat and sharing your questions online at that time. So thank you very much, Catherine. I'd also like to thank Adam Watts, a creative technologist here at the library, who works in Building 61 and is operating our stream behind the scenes. We couldn't do it without you, Adam, so thank you very much for helping us out today. Now, on to the good part, our panelists. They are both affiliated with our partners up the road at the University of Colorado Boulder. First up today, we will have Kent Willman. Kent is an instructor at CU's School of Education. He taught high school social studies for 32 years, and in 2017 spoke about fake news both here at the Boulder Public Library and to an overflow crowd at the Longmont Public Library. And after Kent, we will be hearing from Emily Adams. Emily is a senior communications specialist at CU and a master's student in its media and public engagement program. She's currently working with a group of CU researchers looking more closely at how today's media technologies affect democracy. We're so lucky to have both of you, Kent and Emily. Thank you very much for your time. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Kent for his portion of our presentation today. Take it away, Kent.
Thank you. So as Terja said, I work in the School of Education. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a journalism professor. I work with teachers. So what you're going to get from me is what I use to help train teachers to be better, to help train students to be better consumers of the news. Will say I do have a background in journalism. I was a paper boy for quite some time. So how to consume the news and still be a good citizen. One of the things I want to point out is that working in the School of Education, I get to work with practicing or up and coming new teachers. We have really good ones there. We have dedicated, smart, hardworking, civic-minded teacher candidates who are going to be filling in classrooms pretty soon. We don't have enough of them, nor do we have enough of teachers of color coming up, but we have good ones nonetheless. I feel very fortunate to do so. Let's get started with some political cartoons. Dilbert from Tuesday, sorry. Did you see the shocking claims in the video I emailed you? Yes, the video is so obviously fake that only a raging moron would think any of it is true. I think all of it's true. Well, that's one data point in my favor. It's the only conversation you have with your family and friends. We're also concerned about disinformation campaigns coming out of Russia and China. How do we know if a news story is true? If I agree with it? confirmation bias and what to believe in the news is clearly a problem nowadays. And this problem, fake news hole for swallowing up all of the United States, people in the United States on their social media platforms. I think I heard a story in Hawaii actually outlawed the use of cell phones on their streets because they had so many people getting hurt. This is not a new problem. This is an old problem. We've had this problem with media for quite some time. To give you an example, here's a copy of an overhead. I used to teach with an overhead projector. You guys remember those? Copy of an overhead I used quite a number of years ago to help with media literacy. CNN special report, lies. Bill Clinton, lies. Barnacle resigns, all lies. Why do you pay attention to that stuff? I want to be informed. Mark Twain, if you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. If you do read the newspaper, you are misinformed. Napoleon, 4 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. Paul Simon, man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. I suspect you'll be singing that song in the back of your head the rest of the day. Clearly a good point about confirmation bias. If you want to have a really interesting time, invite Thomas Jefferson to your house, let him debate with himself. Here's what he said. Here's one thing he said. Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. Later on, he says, a man who reads nothing at all is better educated than a man who reads nothing but newspapers. Seems to be of two minds about the news. Some fake news from the Teddy Roosevelt era. Let's say at the top you see a newspaper report of a favorable newspaper for Teddy Roosevelt reporting one of his meetings. On the bottom you see an unfavorable newspaper report of one of his meetings. I guess this is not a new problem. Fill in the blank here. Guess the type of media. One faction, spearheaded primarily by educators, believed that blank could be a tool for enriching people's lives. They wanted a government-funded national blank program that would be largely informational and educational. Another faction believed blank would be used for trivial purposes and become a waste of time. In a now famous quote, a blank pioneer responded to blank's commercialization by asking, "What have you done with my child? You have sent him out into the streets in rags of ragtime to collect money from all and sundry. You have made of him a laughingstock of intelligence, surely a stench in the nostrils of the gods of the ionosphere." And that could be television, it could be social media, it could be the internet, it was radio. From the 1898 St. Paul Globe, look at their motto. The Globe's motto, live news, latest news, reliable news, no fake war news. It's probably been around for a while. I'm sure you're all aware of altered photographs. Here's Abraham Lincoln on John Calhoun's body. Getting rid of the cigar because smoking was bad from Winston Churchill. Well, the Soviet Union has been disappearing people in all kinds of ways for all kinds of time. This next one's going to break your heart. It's one of my favorite fake news stories of all time, but it is fake news. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Modern version of the same thing. Remember when I was a kid, we came back after going to church on Sunday or on Christmas Eve. There was a report on the news that said that the weatherman had picked up radar of Santa Claus coming down from the North Pole. I knew then that Santa Claus was real because the news wouldn't lie to me. Some disinformation in the Black Lives Matter movement. George Floyd's really not dead. Billionaire philanthropist George Soros is supplying bricks to protesters. The Army's pre-staging for martial law. Now on the right side here, you see some links you could go to check out how these were pointed out as disinformation and misinformation by the USA Today. Modern media is trying to do a good job of help us figure out this stuff. Other folks trying to help us do a good job here are schools, teachers, and librarians. We have lots of work to do for the next generation, help them become better consumers of the media. There are good resources that are available to teachers and students that are competent news organizations that provide good news to students. And media literacy is required by the Colorado State Social Studies standards. Shows up in the standards 138 times. Last year, there was a bill proposed in the state legislature to include media literacy in schools. It was pointed out to the legislator that it was already in there. She had to say, never mind. Stanford History Education Group is doing a great job with teaching social studies stuff. They provide online resources for teachers and students, including the relatively new civic online reasoning assessments. You see them there evaluating Wikipedia, claims on the YouTube, claims on Twitter. They try to develop 3 core competencies: who's behind the information, what's the evidence, what do other sources say? All things students need to learn to do. Another great program is the News Literacy Project. Here's one example of them trying them to help students become careful of social media influencers. On the other side of there, sanitize before you share, helping students be careful about what news they share before they share disinformation and misinformation for their friends. It's my favorite website to point out to parents. Common Sense Media, and it actually does provide a common sense view of helping kids and parents navigate the media world. There's help there with movies, TV shows, video games. You even have help here with how to become media literate and watching the news. Good stuff for you parents out there. Of course, librarians have been coming to our rescue for quite some time. Provide all kinds of ways to help kids and teachers deal with fake news, finding fact-checking sites and plugins. They're really quite helpful. They also provide programs like this one tonight. Thank you, Boulder Public Library. Nice work. But to be careful what we ask for, however. If we raise and teach our children to question the news and question authority, let's not be surprised when our children grow up to question the news and question authority. I don't know about you, but I tried to teach my kids to think for themselves, and they did. What was I thinking? Advice from grandma. All I need to know about media literacy, I learned from my grandma. Grandma says, do your homework, check out your sources, find out where your news is coming from. Be especially careful of strangers online. Ask, what are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to sell me, and why? Media is not free, as pointed out here by the Colorado Sun, a brand new online news source. The articles are free to read, but they're not free to report. At some point in time, we have to make sure we're getting money to these new media sources so they can pay the reporters and everybody else working for them. Even PBS and NPR aren't free. They're paid for by advertisers and people like you and me. Grandma says, eat your vegetables. Get your news from a variety of sources, even those you disagree with, like broccoli. Welcome some new ideas into your news life from time to time. Be careful about eating too many sweets. Be careful of confirmation bias. I had a friend of mine, a former student actually, on Facebook, shared a post about an upcoming celestial event about a smiley face being formed in the sky by a crescent moon and Venus and Saturn. I thought, this is very cool. I wanted to get my camera ready to try and take pictures of this event. Taking pictures of the moon is a really hard thing to do, by the way. It's going to be happening on May 16th. May 15th rolled around. I was ready to go, get out, and I was going to look up online, make sure I knew what time to be out there. Looked up online. It was a fake news story. I'd wanted it to be true so much. Grandma says, be responsible. Media gives us what we ask for. Ask for the good stuff. One exercise I have my students do is they want to know news, need to know news exercise. You look at news stories and decide whether it's a want to know or need to know story. As I was writing this lesson, this is a true story. As I was writing this lesson, on the crawl and CNN on the bottom, 2 stories came up. One story about about Obamacare being approved by the Supreme Court. Is it a want to know or need to know story? Very next story on the crawl was 15-foot alligator found in Florida. Want to know or need to know story. Grandma also says sharing is caring. Share carefully when you share stuff. Grandma says say thank you. Most news organizations, reporters, and even social media sharers are committed to the public good. All you have to do to remind yourself about how important media is go to the Pulitzer Prize winning website, look at the stories that win for all sorts of things. Think to yourself, where would we be if we hadn't had these people reporting this stuff to us? We could not survive as a democracy without them. Make sure you say thank you to your news organizations. Thomas Jefferson speaks to us once again. We are the ones with the power in this media organization, media literacy issue. We're the ones that have to learn to become better consumers of it. Here he says, I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of society but the people themselves. We think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion. Remedy is not to take it away from them, but to inform their discretion by education. Part of the reason why I'm a teacher. Thank you to the Boulder Public Library.
Kent, thank you so much for that and for being here today. If you have questions for Kent, please post them in the chat. Meanwhile, we will move on to our second panelist, Emily Adams. Emily, I am turning it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Terja. So as Terja mentioned earlier, I am a student in a media studies program at CU Boulder. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how media works, who owns media, and some of the things that Kent mentioned, which is, what are people trying to accomplish with media? What's their kind of underlying motive? And I think he was absolutely right that fake news is not a new phenomenon. But I think that one of the things that's making it such a big deal today is that the internet and social media has just amped it up so much, and there's so much coming at us all the time. So my goal today was just to kind of talk about social media and how we can be more responsible citizens on social media. I'm really concentrating on 3 of the big ones, which are Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of those. And I kind of want to start with, I've heard it called a sandwich compliment, that you start with something nice, and then you give your critiques, and then you wrap with something nice. So I want to start by saying that social media really is great for connecting with your friends and family, for learning new skills, and for finding community with other people. It's also nearly ubiquitous at this point. 70% of US adults were on Facebook as of 2019. YouTube was really close behind, and it was actually the first in popularity for younger adults. And according to a Pew Research Center report, more than 55% of adults now say that they get their news often or sometimes from social media. So as much as their taglines want you to believe, though, that the social media platforms are about that connection and learning and community, that's not really their end goal. And I think a lot of us know that, but it's easy to forget in the day-to-day. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this presentation, it's this. Social media platforms really don't have our best interests at heart. And I don't say that to demonize the platforms or make everybody quit the platforms. I'm on a lot of them, and quitting isn't an option for a lot of us anymore for social or for work reasons. So instead, I just want to advocate today for using the platforms responsibly and avoiding some of the pitfalls that they present. Okay, so what is the goal of the platforms? Many of them did start with kind of altruistic intentions. The creators of YouTube did start it to just provide a place where people could post videos. Mark Zuckerberg, questionable since he wanted to rate girls' hotness at Harvard, but these didn't start with kind of bad intentions. But what happened was eventually all of these platforms had to come up with a way to make money and turn a profit. So most of you probably know that advertising is a part of all these platforms. But I would say that the business model often kind of goes beyond just selling ads that we would see on TV or in newspapers or in magazines. It's really it feels different in scale. And a lot of you have seen this quote make the rounds. If you're not paying for it, you're not the customer, you're the product being sold. So these platforms, what they're selling is really your attention. They're selling your eyes and sometimes your personal data to pretty much anyone who wants it, from companies to CU Boulder pays for advertising on social media platforms, political consulting firms that we saw with Cambridge Analytica and things like that. So in order to sell your attention, they need to keep you on the platform. And excuse me, this is where algorithms come in, which is probably something that we've all heard of as well, but may not know a whole lot about. So just a disclaimer, I am not a computer scientist. So these are definitions that I found that really kind of reflected what I understand to be true about algorithms and AI. So the problem that is, how do we keep people on the website? And the designers behind the platforms write equations to help solve that problem. And more, they're also designing AI to help solve the problem in real time so that their software systems, these platforms, can react to new input without feedback from a human. And what makes this problematic in one way is that these algorithms that companies use are usually not transparent. So we typically don't know why platforms are showing us what they're showing us. We don't know why these companies are making decisions. We don't know how these companies are making decisions about the content we see. And there are tons of people out there that are studying how these algorithms affect us, and especially in terms of political discourse. There's people from computer science and psychology and media studies. All these people are looking at this problem because it is very new, and it's something we're kind of experimenting on ourselves right now. So that, just to say that there's way more out there on all of these things if you want to read more, a ton of great studies and things by journalists and a lot to read. But today I wanted to take one overall example from the 3 platforms that I mentioned. And in looking up the background on these, I really tried to focus on things that were either sources from inside the company or researchers who were doing research into these platforms. So first we've got Facebook, and they've probably been in the public eye the most for privacy issues and for concerns over the spread of fake news. And just on Facebook, obviously you're not seeing every post by every friend in chronological order. Your news feed is the result of those algorithms. And this Wall Street Journal article that we found really talks about how Facebook convened an internal group of their employees, developers and such, to look at whether this was making discourse more divisive. And they didn't disclose many of the findings publicly, but they did report that the group had concerns about how the platform prioritized user engagement. So that's what you like and what you comment on and what you share. And they said, yeah, we think this is making things more divisive. But unfortunately, the group reported that their final recommendations were shelved in large part by the company leadership. So again, we're back at that disconnect between what might be best for users and what's best for the company. YouTube was one of the most interesting cases that I got to look at last year in a course on democracy and technology. So they've got a recommender system that, you know, it offers you what you should watch next and shows you videos right after the video you stopped watching. And it can be particularly problematic when it comes to serving up those recommendations. People have found that, well, YouTube has found that recommending more extreme videos about anything will keep you watching. And I read a report by a researcher who she noticed it was happening with political content during the 2016 election. She was watching Trump rally videos for a story, and she was kind of surprised when YouTube then started recommending white supremacist rants and conspiracy theories. And so she went and tried it with non-political things. And what she said was, videos about vegetarianism led to videos about veganism. Videos about jogging led to videos about running ultramarathons. And this article shown on the slide is by a former YouTube engineer who discussed how this tendency to keep upping the ante when it comes to content could lead people to believe that certain content, like flat earth theories, are more popular than they actually are. And he and some colleagues built a tool to analyze which videos YouTube's algorithm recommends the most on some topics, like science and elections. And he said, we noticed that in the 2016 election, the candidate that was the most aggressive against media was recommended 4 times more than his opponent. So obviously, you know, you're not seeing the whole picture. You're seeing part of what someone wants you to see. And they don't, you know, maybe they don't have bad intentions, but that's what their algorithm has learned. What the AI has learned keeps you there, keeps you watching. And they have taken some steps since then to mark anti-vaccination videos and things like that. But there's 300 hours of video content being posted to YouTube every minute. So it's obviously pretty hard for them to police. So my caution would be just to beware the YouTube rabbit hole, as a lot of people call it. Passive watching can lead you to some weird stuff that you may not really want to see. And Twitter is probably the platform that makes the most data available to researchers. So there are a lot of studies out there about Twitter and the dynamics of the platform. I thought this one was really interesting for the conversation today. They looked mainly at real users and looked at how much misinformation was being shared by real people. There are also a lot of studies out there about automated bot accounts, including how Russia used them to interfere in the election in 2016. Super interesting to read about. And Twitter is kind of similar to Facebook. They used to function as a chronological feed of everyone that you explicitly followed. But a few years ago, they rolled out an algorithmic timeline. And this was something that I saw a mention of it, and I had to kind of go back and research, are they still using this? And sure enough, right from their FAQs. Additionally, when we identify a tweet, an account to follow, or other content that's popular or relevant, we may add it to your timeline. This means you will sometimes see tweets from accounts you don't follow. We select each tweet using a variety of signals, including how popular it is and how people in your network are interacting with it. So I didn't find a whole lot of research from there about specifically how that's affecting political dialogue, but there are plenty of anecdotal reports by journalists and researchers about people being served conspiracy theories or things from extremist users. So also, you know, Twitter again has taken some recent steps to label misleading information in tweets, but those tools are new and imperfect. So that's definitely still another platform to be cautious on. So like Kent, I also have some tips on being a responsible consumer, and a lot of our tips really overlap a lot. The first being research before you repost or retweet. I've definitely seen people that I know that are usually very responsible people share things on Facebook and say something like, if this is true, which, you know, don't put the onus on your friends and family to do the research on whether something is true. You need to be the one doing the research before you reshare. And it's kind of one of those things, if it sounds too good or too crazy to be true, it probably is. Checking to see whether someone paid for you to see the content. So on Facebook, on Twitter, there are sponsored labels. There on Facebook, there's suggested for you. There's wording indicating that a friend liked this. That generally means that someone's paid for you to see that. So, you know, another good time to be thinking about, why did they pay me to see this? If it's an ad for a bike and you've been researching bikes, that's pretty straightforward. But in political communication, that's definitely a little bit more worrisome. Be suspicious of anonymous users. If you don't know who the person is and they don't have a picture, they don't have a bio, those are the kind of people that you should probably look a little bit more into who they are, see if they have a website, see if there's any other information about them on the internet before you just take what they say at face value. Seek out experts on the topics. Obviously, my bias is toward academic researchers, and I used to be in journalism myself, so I believe that there's still a lot of journalists out there. Kent mentioned the Colorado Sun, which are great people still doing great work in journalism. These people are really knowledgeable, so look them up and see what they're saying and what they're talking about. And then get off the platforms sometimes. Find news outlets you trust and go to their websites directly. I often do that just to kind of recalibrate what's important, because if your friends all share your political affiliations, you can end up, you hear the same things a lot, and it keeps coming at you and keeps coming at you. So it's nice to take a social media break, especially around the election, and be sure, like Kent pointed out, that you're eating your veggies and finding different sources of information and looking in different places than you normally would, rather than just taking whatever comes your way through social. And then I had a couple of fact-checking resources here at the end that I definitely use all of these and read all of these when things come across that seem like they're probably not true. Snopes.com is a great independent source. They research internet hoaxes, so they can tell you whether that Facebook meme that's been forwarded to you is really true. Lately, the one I've been seeing is an RV giveaway. If anyone's actually giving away these huge RVs, things like that. They research those kind of things and will let you know what they've found on those. Politifact.com and PunditFact and also factcheck.org. These are all independent, nonpartisan groups that look at statements by politicians and pundits to PolitiFact rates from true down to pants on fire. So they're a good one. And then NewsGuard Tech is an interesting one that I came across last year. That it's actually a browser plugin that evaluates websites based on some different standards of journalism. So if you go to a website that doesn't do any of its own independent research and doesn't disclose who owns it and things like that, it will flag those things and give you kind of a scorecard, so this is probably one you can trust, or this is probably one you shouldn't trust. So that is my 2 cents for the day. I will stop my sharing and turn it back over here.
Thank you so much, Emily. All right, so this brings us to the question and answer portion of our program. Before we get to the audience Q&A, and for those of you out on YouTube watching, please do post your questions to the chat. We will be getting to your questions. But we wanted to start with some questions that we at the library had come up with, and then also ask Kent and Emily if they have any questions for each other or good discussion questions for the group. But I'm going to start with this one. It's an emotional topic, and it's difficult for a lot of us. What is a tactful way to navigate conversations with friends and loved ones who may have been influenced by known to us disinformation, or use the label fake news to dismiss anything that they disagree with, whether it's true or not? And, Emily, you mentioned Snopes. I've had people actually tell me that Snopes is biased and that they won't accept any of these sources as legitimate fact-checking sources. How would you, and Kent, you as well, please chime in on this, how would you negotiate those conversations, or how do you in your real lives?
I mean, I think if someone's going to just say none of this is true and reject all fact checking. I'm not actually sure how you approach that. But I've definitely approached on social media with friends and family who post something where I've just said, hey, you just might want to read this, or, I think it's good, especially on something like Facebook, where it's generally your friends and family, to assume that everyone's working from a point of good intention there, and that if they have some other input, they might change the way they're looking at something. I mean, you can't help that they shared it, it's already out there, but
Right.
hopefully give them some resources to look at.
Okay. Kent, do you have any thoughts on that one?
What I try to do with folks is tell them they're right before they tell them they're wrong. Like there was a post about, like in some ways the fact check organizations are biased. I mean, that's not a bad thing to say. But they also get the information correct. We were running across a post about people, the protesters tagging the Vietnam Memorial as part of the Black Lives Matter protests. And I checked it out online. I said, and the picture they showed was from a different protest many years earlier. So yeah, what I said was, yes, it's true they did, but it wasn't this time. So what you want to do is try to help people say, yeah, you're trying to do the right thing here by being a consumer of the media, but you also want to try and get it right.
That's actually really good advice, and probably taking a neutral tone and not allowing yourself to become emotional is also important, although that's difficult for all of us. Realistically, we can't check all the facts all the time. Are there cases where, again, Emily, let's start with you, where you think it's more important to check facts, and in other cases, say the 15-foot alligator, maybe it's okay to let that one go on your Facebook feed and not really try to correct that person? Those are extreme examples that I'm interested in, where you might see some nuance there.
I mean, I think before you share anything, you have an obligation to fact check that. I mean, yeah, you can't check everything all the time, but if you find yourself getting, I guess this is just kind of a personal response, but if you find yourself getting really worked up about something, or it's freaking you out, or it's causing you stress, like maybe go and look it up and just make sure that you're actually stressing about something that's true.
Kent, anything else on that one?
Just do your homework. If something doesn't seem to be true, check it out.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, one more thing I would add.
Yeah.
Is that try to get your news from reputable sources. I mean, there are sources that are better than others, and if you can learn to trust a source, learn to trust them. Like Walter Cronkite, everybody trusted Walter. He's not going to lie
Right.
to us. You need to find your own Walters.
Yeah, I thought about making Walter my backdrop for today's event, but it was a little bit too distracting to have two faces in the picture. So that's what we're after here, is re-achieving that standard.
And Ken, I thought what you were saying earlier about recognizing that everyone has bias is great. I think, even Walter Cronkite had biases that slipped into his reporting, but he was not out there to misinform people. You have a sense of who's trying to do right by people and who's not.
So just for our audience, when we were rehearsing for this event, we had a really interesting discussion about how times have changed, and specifically about how maybe the expectation of having both sides of a story reported so that the reader could make their own decision has changed. Kent and Emily, I wondered if you could share some of the things you told us in that earlier conversation about how and why that changed, and some examples of why it isn't, why that's a fuzzier question than it sounds like.
Yeah, so there's definitely some conversation in journalism circles about, it came up particularly because of climate change, that part of journalistic standards of reporting used to be that you would try to be objective by getting a view from both sides. So for a while, that was leading to people, when they were reporting a story on climate change, they would go out and try to find an opposing view on climate change.
Right.
Which, when 90% or however many at this point it is, the scientific community has settled climate change. There are obviously nuances within that, but they've settled that question. And so I think there has been some talk about, we don't need an opposing viewpoint for things that are generally accepted to be true.
Do you think that's mainly an issue in the sciences, or does it bleed into other areas of human knowledge?
Oh, that's a good question.
It involves all kinds of things. I think it happens in the sports world, it happens in the news world, it happens in all kinds of places. Like this, the recent controversy about Gone with the Wind.
What was that? I haven't heard that one.
They took it to HBO Next, took her HBO, whatever the new platform is. HBO took it down because they were concerned about the way in which enslaved people were portrayed in it.
Okay.
And so there's, I think there are settled questions and unsettled questions. We also have to recognize that people's points of views change over time as well.
Okay, interesting. Kent, this gets into something you said in your presentation. Do you have any further advice for parents? Because our children, I have 13-year-old twins, they're the new generation, and they will need to negotiate possibly an even more complicated world than the one that we're negotiating now. As a veteran teacher and a teacher of teachers, what would you have parents tell their children on how to negotiate these topics?
Have the conversation.
Looking at innocent minds here,
Have the conversation. Have the dinner time conversations about news and about programs. Let them see you evaluating websites and trying to get the right information. Teach them about social media sharing protocols, things of that nature. They might pretend like they're not listening to you, but they are. And so I also think the common sense media website's terrific stuff.
Okay.
It takes a really sane sort of viewpoint. It doesn't tell people to turn everything off or turn everything on. It says, here's what we're going to do. Here's some ways to think about it. Here's some ways to behave with it. And let them know that they're going to be responsible people online. The other thing to be careful about is how they're sharing with their friends. I mean, it was a really dangerous world out there for teenagers in the social media land. Let them know that there are safe places for them. There are adults who are on their side trying to help them out.
I'll put a plug in for our library teen programs here. Excellent programs. And then my final question for both of you before we turn it over to our audience Q&A. Is there any reason for anybody to be on Twitter? Really?
So on Twitter, I think it's a lot about who you follow and who you're listening to. It can be, I use it kind of as my headlines. I follow a lot of journalists and I follow a lot of scientists. And I use it to see what people are talking about. But I personally don't participate a lot because it has become a pretty toxic place for people who are active on Twitter, especially women and people of color. That the abuse hurled at folks is pretty bad. But I think as a site where you're kind of aggregating what you are interested in reading and people you're interested in knowing more about what they're saying, I think it can be useful.
Okay.
I like it for educational purposes, but I also like knowing what other people have to. It's a good place to find other viewpoints. I don't like the mendacity, the meanness and just nastiness, sort of the comments out there just aren't helpful in our political world. Used to be in saying about if it bleeds, it leads in media world. If you got those kinds of things, and you see that on television news or newspapers. Like now, if it divides, it flies. If you're trying to, things that divide us as a nation are going to get more play than things that unite us. I think it's just dangerous for us at this point in time. I think we need to find things that bring us together.
Yeah, there's got to be a middle road. All right, well, at this point, I would like to open it up to our audience questions as seen in the chat. So Catherine, I will turn it over to you, and you put the audience questions to our panelists.
Great, thanks, Terja. We've got some good ones that have come in here. So Joe asks, Kent, how much classroom time do social studies teachers get to devote in a school day or week to looking critically at news stories or current events?
Not enough. We need more social studies teaching. I mean, it seems as if math and science and English is taking over everything. We need more time for that. And one of the problems we have in social studies world, if you're taking a world history class, you have to teach everything that's ever happened in the world. So you have to make some cuts somewhere. The best teachers, however, oftentimes will start their classes with news. A new news program, things of that nature, and spend some time helping kids navigate that sort of stuff. Other people spend at least one day a week doing it. My personal feeling is if you're not doing it as a teacher, you're not doing your job right.
Great. Thanks, Kent. And Lisa asks, Kent, can you talk more about the want to know, need to know idea?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. Just put it on a scale. Put it on a continuum. Want to know stories, need to know stories. And then just run down the stories and put them where you think they belong. Is this a need to know story? Is it a want to know story? How close to the middle does it fit? How far away does it fit? This helps you become better consumers of the media. I think it varies by person to person as well. I mean, there might be people really interested in 15-foot alligators. A lot of people don't care about the Supreme Court, but it's just pretty straightforward sort of exercise. Just put it on a scale and have kids rate the stories and we need to know, want to know sort of basis.
Yeah, and then no, you go ahead, Emily.
I think it's also important to know that the things that you click on and that you read are going to inform what you see next. It's going to affect the Google stories that come up, the social media stories that come up. So I have a personal rule that no matter how curious I am about a story involving any of the Kardashians, I will not click on those stories because I don't want to give that little nudge to someone who's like, oh, we should write more of those.
Amen.
So, well, just as a follow-up question, with this continuum, are you suggesting, Kent, that people then, once they've kind of laid things out on this continuum, that they then try to focus more on the need to know?
Oh yeah. Although it's not bad to think it's want to know stories. I mean, sports world is kind of a want to know story sort of stuff. I enjoy those sports stories, and there are people that enjoy all kinds of news information. I think it's important for you to recognize what's happening, though. As Emily's saying, they're feeding you this stuff on purpose because you asked for it one way or another. Media gives us what we asked for, and we have to be careful what we ask for.
Thanks. All right, next question. Could we hear more about confirmation bias? Is this one of those things the brain does that we have to work hard to overcome? And that question's coming to us from KJ. Emily, maybe we can start with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point that, psychologically, we trend toward things that we know and that we already agree with, and we are drawn to people who have similar views, and it is something to take into account and be conscious of especially in how you're consuming media.
We get those little jolts of, I think it was Catherine was talking about earlier, little jolts of dopamine every time somebody likes something we've posted online. So be careful about that stuff. It ends up affecting your brain. I think if you know that, I think you're more cognizant of it and you're more likely to avoid the problems.
This is a follow-up question to that from me, because I'm curious. Do you think it's better to be passive when you're on social media? Is it to avoid that whole dopamine influenced effect, just read and comment on what other people post and absorb and learn, but maybe not try to be a content provider yourself? Or is that unfair?
I think it's really up to the user. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with if you have strong feelings about something and you're passionate about something, to share those things online. I think, being a passive consumer can be dangerous in some ways if you're just watching the things coming at you. But it's also okay to be a reader and to be someone who's out there kind of evaluating. I've always kind of been that way as an introvert. I'm kind of sitting back watching things and thinking about things. But if you're outspoken and you want to be out there, that's great. Just do it responsibly and make sure you're not part of the problem, I guess.
We live in a democracy. We're having some serious conversations where everybody can play. And that's an amazing thing. I mean, this is a new part about social media. I mean, it used to be that just very few people got to play in our social kind of conversations on a broad scale. Now everybody can. I think that's important. I think it's good for us to do that sort of stuff. But it's also important for us to listen. I think I got in trouble the other day on a Twitter chat I was on where I wasn't listening well enough. I was just making sure people heard me and not spending enough time listening to what other people had to say.
This is a question that comes from Angela that ties in well, I think, with what we're talking about right now. Angela says, some people say that the beauty of the internet is that it gives a voice to people who may not normally be heard through the usual channels. Some people I know feel it allows for an underground voice. But how do you discern the validity of a non-traditional viewpoint?
There would also be people who say that it gives a voice to the people that don't need a voice. There are people out there that are saying things online. It's like, my gosh, this person ought to be gone. And I think the trick is, how do you navigate that? How do you become a savvy consumer of this stuff? I really like the idea of being a platform where everybody can play. It also means we need to be careful about who's playing and who's not.
I think it was also one of the, one of the tenets of the early internet was that it was that democratic, everyone could have their website and give their opinion on things or share their knowledge. I think now so much of what we see is corporate owned, has someone behind it driving the decisions being made and really shaping the world that we're seeing online. And so a lot of those people that maybe should have more of a voice don't have the money to have a voice. So I think, again, it's just important to keep looking at who owns it, what are they trying to do, what's their end goal. Maybe they have a lot of money and their end goal is really great. Maybe they have a lot of money and they want to disrupt the 2016 elections. You just have to be really careful.
Where would we be without the George Floyd video?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Also another case of, did we really need to see, and especially people of color, did they really need to see that quite so often? And yes. That hold another presentation conversation as well.
Right.
That's an important one.
We've got a couple of people asking about other fact-checking websites that might be helpful. Levi is one of our audience members asking about that. Other than the ones you've mentioned so far, do you have any other recommendations for people?
My recommendation is do it yourself. If you run across a website that's not very good, or you don't know, or you wonder about it, open up a new tab and type in the name of the website and reviews. So that's how fact checkers do it themselves, is to check things out on their own.
Well, Ken, what was the one that you were mentioning earlier too? There was a really good one that you would run across through the Colorado Sun.
going to share my screen. I'll show you really quick. So yesterday morning, I went to the Colorado Sun website, and here it is, their morning Sunriser kind of brief news comments. And then one of the things they mentioned was a disinformation reporter. I thought, well, that's interesting. I didn't know Colorado Sun had a disinformation reporter. So I clicked on this, and it took me to this website, which was the Stand Up Republic website. I go, I've never heard of this. So well, how am I going to find out about it? And I did what I just suggested that everybody else does. Good fact checkers. I opened up a new browser, I typed in Stand Up Republic reviews. Come to find out, it's a website that's run by the former presidential candidate and former 2012 presidential nominee Mitt Romney. And it's kind of a right-leaning advocacy organization that's kind of anti-Trump at the same time. I looked at the various other things in here to read about it, learn about it. I also thought about if it's mentioned in the Colorado Sun, it must be a pretty good website. So I've learned to trust them. The more I learned about it, the more I thought, well, okay, this is a good place to go and find out some information. I learned some more about psyoping, that people are psyoping Americans. Turned out to be a pretty worthwhile place to go visit.
Kent, could you define psyoping for us?
Well, I'll let Emily do that.
Okay, Emily, please.
I do not know much about psyoping. I've heard it as a tool that the military or intelligence agencies use to psychologically, what is it? It's psychological operations.
I think they're trying to influence our brains one way or another, try to get us to think one way, think another way. And the more you hear stories, the more likely you are to believe them in one fashion or another.
So it's sort of an insidious form of propaganda, and almost.
It's disinformation at its core.
Okay, interesting.
And I think it's probably something that does have some conspiracy theories around it.
Yeah.
Another one.
Gotta be careful with that too.
If things are sounding a little crazy, maybe look a little bit deeper into what they're saying.
This question is from Joe for Emily. Which of the social media platforms you mentioned do you find most valuable for learning about what is going on in the world? And what would you like to see the platform do or change?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think Twitter and Facebook can both be good for finding out what's going on in the world. If you're being responsible about it and cautious about it. I think YouTube is also a great tool. There's so much, from different media outlets that are posting to YouTube that I think it can be really valuable. I think what I'd like to see social media platforms do is just really take some time to think about the effects that it's having and listen to your employees, listen to your developers, make sure there are people at the table in your companies that maybe have a background in ethics, in philosophy. We joke about majoring in philosophy, or what are you going to do with that? But we now need those people at the table having these conversations about whether we should be doing this particular thing, whether this change to the platform is going to benefit society or whether it's going to be detrimental.
This is more of a comment than a question, but it just made me think a lot. There's been a lot of discussion. I read a really good article about how Wikipedia has kind of gone from, oh, don't use that, that's not a reputable source, to a really great starting point for educating yourself on a topic. I wonder if there could be some sort of neutral social media platform along the lines of Wikipedia. I don't know how it would probably have to take donations in order to fund itself, but you take money out of the equation and maybe you could have a decent, constructive social media platform. I'm not an entrepreneurial type, so it won't be me inventing it, but just in case any of our smart patrons out there listening to this can take that idea and run, go for it, guys.
I think Wikipedia is a really interesting example because of the way that they're governed and the way that what's being put up on the platform does have to go through some checkpoints of actual humans looking at things. And they are a nonprofit entity as far as I know. So I think, they're not pushing likes and clicks and engagement, and they are, misinformation certainly pops up on Wikipedia, but it often gets taken care of pretty quickly. There are going to be certain controversial topics that that back and forth happens, but I think it's a really interesting example of a platform that is doing some things differently than a lot of the corporate or commercial platforms.
So KJ asks, if I want to minimize Facebook/social media manipulating me, does it help to avoid interacting with sponsored posts?
I would think so, yes. I try not to click on anything that's sponsored, even if it's something I do want to go to even if I do want to buy it, I actually, just go and search for it and go to their website directly.
Mani just has a comment for us that Twitter is great for emergency communications, such as about tornadoes and hurricanes.
Yeah, and I think it played a role in the Arab Spring too, that a lot of people have lauded as a good constructive role for people trying to make societal changes. Again, the Arab Spring didn't work out like it was intended to work out, but social media isn't always bad in movements like that either.
Yeah, I think both Facebook and Twitter played a huge role in that organizing and even in community organizing now. I went to a Black Lives Matter car rally in Denver because I'd heard about it through Instagram Live. I think, these are important ways for people to share information. Yeah, definitely in the case of emergencies. You're getting the information from people who are on the ground first, which is important in a lot of ways.
Like Jefferson said, the answer is not to take it away from them. The answer is to educate people.
Yeah, that's very true.
Speaking to us from the grave.
Terja, I see you've, I think maybe you've received something, another question from Longmont about how the media, but I'm not seeing the rest of the question here. Do you have the complete question?
I don't. How is that coming through, Catherine?
It's just here. Okay, it's continued. I think the rest of it just came through. Is the media bias chart good for a source of which news is reliable?
Oh, the news media bias chart. I think you have a slide of that, don't you, Kent?
I'll pull it up here in a second. It's a great chart. There's all kinds of stuff on there, way to figure things out. Now, there are people who will look at this media bias chart and say it's biased, and it is. But you also have to take a look at it and decide for yourself whether you agree with where placements fit or where they don't. But it's a really worthwhile sort of way of thinking about the news and getting some places to look. Places up here are probably pretty fair, straightforward news organizations. Places that get out to the other side, less so. You might like those because they fit better with you. One of my favorite teaching tools.
I hadn't seen the version with the National Enquirer. That's really
Isn't that great?
And one of our audience members today is interested in getting access to the slides with these different resources. And I think we're going to have your email addresses posted at the end.
That is correct.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. So audience members will be able to get in touch with you if they're interested in getting their hands on these.
I'm also happy to share mine with you guys if you have a place to post them.
Yeah, we can put them in the description of the YouTube event after the fact. So if we'll make sure those get to Adam for posting for people afterwards. Great question.
Okay. All right, Terj, I'm going to turn it back over to you at this point.
Right. Just a true confession, I myself have been fooled by fake news. I'm remembering a time when somebody posted a heartwarming story about a golden retriever that rescued a bunch of people from the burning towers of 9/11. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker, shared it with a bunch of people, and then a former colleague of mine gently pointed out to me it was a total fabrication. Nice story, not true at all. So it happens to everybody, even librarians and journalists and teachers and experts of all stripes. So we all need to, yeah, exactly. We all need to check our facts. I'm sure if I went around the panel, we'd all have a story like that. So at least I hope so. It's not just me. So I just want to ask Kent and Emily if either of you have any final remarks for our audience before we sign off for the day. Kent?
Yeah, I think the final remark I would like to say is the answer is in your brains and in your own lives. We can't regulate ourselves out of this. The answer belongs in the hands of our citizens. We're up to it. We can do it.
Emily, anything to say?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, you know, it's in some ways unfair of these companies to be putting it all on the consumers to do the work. And there's a lot of conversation out there about how much role platforms and the government should take in this. But, you know, I think there's always going to be an issue in some way. There always has been with fake news. So I think it's just important to keep educating yourself and be responsible and keep learning. We're all trying to lifelong learners. Keep doing that, and we'll be in a better place.
That's right. Nobody is too old or too young to learn something new. Well, what can I say? Big thanks to both of you. I'm so appreciative. We all are so appreciative of your sharing your time with us and helping us become savvier news consumers. It's helpful to our patrons, and that's what we do here at the library. It's a very fraught time as well, and I know that your optimism and encouragement has been reassuring for me, and therefore I'm sure it has been for our audience as well. So thank you both, Kent and Emily. I'd also like to again thank Catherine, Adam, and the Boulder Library Foundation. And I want to thank our audience for tuning in and asking such great questions. Finally, if you and our audience know other people who would have enjoyed this event or gotten something out of it, it is being recorded and it will be on YouTube for anyone to view after the fact. So please direct them there. There are other great programs on our YouTube channel as well. And that's all I've got. So have a great rest of your evening, folks. We're very glad you tuned in. And yep, share the word. We can control the news that we consume, and we can be informed good citizens. So
librarians and libraries rock.
Oh, thank you, Kent.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for hosting.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Thanks, Kent.